The knife slipped from Alira's hand and clattered against the stone floor the moment the doors of the great hall burst open. Every head in the kitchen turned. Guards did not storm through that door unless something had gone terribly wrong, and the look on the lead guard's face told her this was one of those nights. The Alpha wants every Omega in the courtyard, now! Alira's heart pounded as she wiped her hands on her apron and followed the others outside into the cold night air. Torches lined the courtyard, casting long shadows across the gathered pack. She kept her eyes low, the way she always did, the way she had trained herself to do for 7 long years since she arrived at Crimson Moon territory with nothing but a torn cloak and a broken pack bond. Nobody knew her real story. They only knew she had come from nowhere, been given the lowest rank in the pack, and had never once spoken directly to Alpha Kale, the man who ruled over thousands of wolves with a stare that could freeze blood. In 7 years, he had never called her name. He had never looked at her in a crowded room. Some said he did not know she existed. Others whispered that he knew exactly who she was, and that was precisely why he stayed away. Tonight, something was different. As the Omegas lined up in the flickering torchlight, Kale stood at the top of the stone steps, his broad shoulders squared, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Beside him stood his beta, Finn, whispering urgently into his ear. "There has been a breach," Kale said, his voice carrying easily across the silent courtyard. "A scout from the Ashwood pack was found within our borders tonight. We do not yet know what he was searching for, or who he was working for. Until we do, every Omega will remain within the inner wall. No exceptions." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ashwood pack had been a quiet threat for years, a rival territory that had never fully accepted the boundaries drawn after the last great war between packs. Alira had heard stories about their Alpha, a ruthless man named Callum Ashwood, who was said to take whatever he wanted and answer to no one. As the crowd began to disperse, Alira felt a strange prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the kind of feeling that told her she was being watched. She lifted her eyes for just a moment, breaking her own rule, and found Kale's gaze locked directly onto her. It lasted less than 3 seconds. Then he turned away, speaking to Finn as if nothing had happened, and the moment was gone before Alira could even be certain it was real. She hurried back toward the kitchens, her pulse still racing, telling herself she had imagined it. Alpha Kale did not look at Omegas. He definitely did not look at her. And yet the warmth that had spread through her chest in those 3 seconds refused to fade, no matter how many times she told herself it meant nothing. Inside the kitchen, her closest friend Mira was waiting, arms crossed, an eyebrow raised. "You went pale out there. What happened?" "Nothing happened," Alira said quickly, grabbing a rag and pretending to wipe down the counter that was already clean. "There was a scout. From Ashwood territory." Mira's face lost its playful edge immediately. "That's not nothing. That's the first breach in years." She lowered her voice, glancing toward the door. "You know what people say about Ashwood scouts. They don't just look at borders, they look at people, faces, names." Alira's hands stilled on the counter. Why would they care about names? "Because," Mira said, stepping closer, "Alpha Callum has been trying to find weaknesses in Crimson Moon for years. And everyone knows the fastest way to weaken an Alpha is to find out who he cares about." The words settled uncomfortably in Alira's stomach, though she could not explain why. She was nobody, an Omega who scrubbed pots and swept floors. There was nothing about her that any rival Alpha could possibly want to use as leverage. Still, sleep did not come easily that night. She lay on her narrow cot in the small room she shared with 2 other Omegas, staring at the ceiling, replaying those 3 seconds in the courtyard over and over. The way Kale's eyes had held hers, the way something in his expression had flickered before he turned away, something that looked almost like restraint. She had seen him from a distance countless times over the years. At gatherings, during training exercises, when he addressed the pack from the steps of the Great Hall. He was always composed, always distant, a king carved from stone, who never let anyone close enough to see beneath the surface. Some of the older Omegas said he had been that way since before Alira arrived, that something had happened to him long ago that made him build walls no one could climb. She told herself none of that mattered to her. She was not foolish enough to imagine a future where the Alpha King noticed a girl who worked in his kitchens. She had learned long ago not to hope for things that were never meant to be hers. And yet, 3 days passed with no further sign of trouble. The extra guards patrolling the inner wall began to relax, though they never fully stood down. Alira returned to her usual routine, waking before dawn to help prepare the morning meals, spending long hours on her feet, falling into bed each night exhausted enough to avoid thinking too much about courtyards and torchlight, and eyes that lingered a moment too long. On the 4th night, everything changed again. She had been sent to deliver a tray of food to the training hall, where several senior warriors were reviewing border reports late into the evening. The hallway leading there was usually empty at that hour, lit only by a few torches along the stone walls. Alira walked quickly, tray balanced carefully, her soft footsteps echoing faintly. She never heard him approach. One moment the hallway was empty ahead of her. The next, a figure stepped out from a side corridor directly into her path, moving with the kind of silent speed only a trained wolf possessed. Alira gasped and stumbled backward, the tray tilting dangerously in her hands. A strong hand caught the edge of the tray before it could fall, steadying it in an instant. Alira's eyes traveled up from that hand, along a muscled forearm, to a face she had only ever seen from a distance. Alpha Kale stood less than a foot away from her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold hidden in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool hallway. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. "You should not be walking these halls alone at night," he said finally, his voice low and rough, nothing like the commanding tone he used when addressing the pack. Alira's mouth had gone completely dry. "I was told to bring food to the training hall, Alpha." Something shifted in his expression at the word Alpha, though she could not read what it meant. He released the tray slowly, his fingers brushing against hers for just a fraction of a second, and that brief contact sent a jolt of warmth racing up her arm that had nothing to do with fear. "Finish your task," he said, stepping back, putting careful distance between them again. "Then return directly to the kitchens. Do not linger in the corridors tonight." "Yes, Alpha." He turned to walk away, then paused, his broad back still facing her. For a long moment he said nothing at all, and Alira held her breath, waiting. "What is your name?" he asked quietly, without turning around. Her heart nearly stopped. 7 years, and he had never once asked. "Alira," she managed to say. He was silent for another moment. Then, so quietly she almost missed it entirely, he said, "Be careful, Alira," and then he was gone, disappearing down the corridor as silently as he had appeared. Alira stood frozen in the hallway for a long time after he left, the tray trembling slightly in her hands, her mind racing to understand what had just happened. 7 years of silence, and in the span of 1 week, he had looked at her across a courtyard and spoken her name in a dim hallway as though it mattered to him. She delivered the food to the training hall in a daze, barely registering the polite thanks from the warriors inside. On her walk back to the kitchens, she found herself glancing over her shoulder more than once, half expecting to see him again, though the corridors remained empty and silent. That night, she did not sleep at all. She lay awake replaying the warmth of his fingers against hers, the low rasp of his voice saying her name, the strange intensity in his eyes that seemed to hold something back, something enormous and carefully restrained. She did not know it yet, but across the fortress, in his private chambers overlooking the training grounds, Kale was doing the exact same thing. Standing at his window, staring out at nothing, his heart hammering in his chest, for the first time in longer than he could remember. He had promised himself 7 years ago that he would never approach her, that he would protect her from a distance, silently, without ever letting her know the truth that had haunted him since the very night she arrived at his gates, half-starved and completely unaware of what she truly was to him. But watching her stumble in that hallway, feeling her skin against his for even a single second, had shattered something inside him that he was no longer certain he could rebuild. Somewhere beyond the borders of Crimson Moon territory, in a fortress carved into dark stone, Alpha Callum Ashwood studied a report laid out on his table by torchlight. His scout had returned with information that made his mouth curl into a slow, satisfied smile. 7 years he has hidden her, Callum murmured to the wolf standing beside him. 7 years, and he never claimed her. Interesting. He tapped a finger against the parchment, against a rough description of a young woman with dark hair and quiet eyes who worked in the Crimson Moon kitchens. "Do we move against her, Alpha?" the wolf asked. Callum's smile widened. "Not yet. First, we watch. A king who hides his weakness for 7 years will do anything to keep it hidden a little longer." He set the parchment down and looked out toward the mountains that separated his territory from Kale's. "And when the time is right, we will make sure the whole world learns exactly what Alpha Kale has been protecting." Back within the walls of Crimson Moon, unaware of the storm quietly gathering beyond her borders, Illyra finally drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with dark eyes and a voice that whispered her name like it was something precious. For 7 years she had been invisible. Now, for reasons she could not yet understand, that invisibility was beginning to crack, and there was no way to know yet whether what lay beneath it would bring her closer to happiness or straight into danger she had never imagined possible. The following morning, the entire pack was summoned once more to the courtyard, and this time the mood was different. Guards stood at every entrance. Warriors lined the walls with weapons visible instead of hidden beneath their cloaks. Illyra felt the tension the moment she stepped outside, thick enough that it seemed to press against her skin. Kale stood at the top of the steps again, but this time Finn was not the only one beside him. 2 senior warriors flanked his other side, their expressions grim. When Kale spoke, his voice carried an edge that had not been there 4 nights earlier. "The scout who breached our border was not acting alone," he announced. "We have confirmed he was sent by Ashwood Pack, and we believe his mission was reconnaissance, not simple trespassing." He paused, letting the words settle over the silent crowd. "Until further notice, no one leaves the inner walls without an escort. This is not a request." Whispers spread quickly through the gathered wolves, fear and confusion mixing in equal measure. Illyra stood among the other Omegas, trying to steady her breathing, trying not to think about the conversation she had overheard from Mira days earlier about Ashwood scouts and the names they searched for. As the crowd began to disperse, she felt that same prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She lifted her eyes and once again found Kale watching her, though this time he did not look away when their gazes met. Instead, something passed between them, something wordless and heavy, before Finn touched his arm and drew his attention elsewhere. Illyra walked back toward the kitchens with her heart pounding, aware for the first time that whatever was happening around her was far bigger than a single hallway encounter or a single flicker of unexpected warmth. Something enormous was beginning to move beneath the surface of her quiet life, and she was standing directly in its path, whether she understood why or not. The following days passed in a strange, uneasy rhythm. Guards doubled at every gate. Warriors trained late into the evening, their movements sharper, their voices lower, as though the entire fortress had drawn a collective breath and was waiting to see what would happen next. Illyra threw herself into her work, scrubbing pots until her hands ached, chopping vegetables until her fingers went numb, anything to keep her mind from wandering back to that hallway, to that voice saying her name. It did not work. On the 6th day, an emergency messenger arrived from the northern border, breathless and pale, demanding to see the Alpha immediately. Word spread through the fortress within the hour. Ashwood Pack had requested a formal meeting, claiming they wished to discuss a peace agreement regarding the disputed border territory. Kale had agreed to host the meeting within Crimson Moon walls, a decision that left many of his senior warriors uneasy. He knows it is a trap, Finn argued quietly as Alira passed near the war room, carrying a tray of tea, close enough to catch fragments of the conversation through the half-open door. Why would you invite Callum Ashwood inside our own walls? Because if I refuse, Kale's voice answered, low and controlled, he will say I fear him, and every neighboring pack will see it as weakness. Better to face him where I hold the advantage. Alira lingered a moment too long outside the door before forcing herself to move on, her mind spinning with everything she had just heard. Alpha Callum, inside Crimson Moon walls. The same Callum whose scouts searched for names and faces. The same Callum Mira had warned her about. She told herself it had nothing to do with her. She was an Omega who worked in the kitchens. Whatever business existed between two rival alphas belonged to a world far above her own, a world of politics and power she had no place in. She almost believed it. The night of the meeting arrived 3 days later, and the entire fortress transformed. Extra torches lined the courtyard. The great hall had been prepared with long tables and careful precision, every detail arranged to project strength rather than hospitality. Alira had been assigned, along with several other kitchen workers, to help serve the visiting delegation, a task that filled her with a nervous energy she could not fully explain. She kept her eyes down as she carried trays between the kitchen and the hall, following the strict instructions she had been given. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not linger. Move quickly and quietly. She had done similar work at smaller gatherings before, and told herself this would be no different. It was different from the very first moment Alpha Callum Ashwood walked through the doors. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with pale eyes that swept across the room like he was cataloging every person within it, calculating their worth, their weaknesses, their usefulness. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own power, and something about the way his gaze lingered on the gathered servants made Alira's skin crawl. She kept to the far side of the hall, delivering trays to the tables assigned to lower-ranking members of the Ashwood delegation, careful to stay as far from the head table as her duties allowed. It almost worked. She was refilling a pitcher near the side wall when she felt it again, that same prickling awareness she had felt in the courtyard days earlier. She lifted her eyes without thinking and found not Kale watching her this time, but Callum himself, his pale gaze fixed directly on her from across the crowded hall. Her blood turned cold. He did not look away when she noticed him. If anything, his expression sharpened, a slow, considering look crossing his face, as if he had just confirmed something he had only suspected before. Alira quickly lowered her eyes and hurried back toward the kitchen, her hands trembling around the empty pitcher, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain someone nearby must be able to hear it. She did not see Kale rise from his seat at the head table moments later, his own eyes following the exact path Callum's gaze had just taken. She did not see the way his jaw tightened, or the barely contained fury that flickered across his features before he forced his expression back into careful neutrality. But Finn saw it. And later that night, once the visiting delegation had been shown to their guest quarters and the great hall had finally emptied, Finn found Kale standing alone on the outer wall, staring out into the darkness, with a stillness that worried him. He saw her, Finn said quietly, coming to stand beside his alpha. It was not a question. Kale did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. Yes. Kale, if he suspects anything, I know what he suspects. Kale's hands tightened against the stone ledge in front of him. I have known for 7 years that this day might come. I simply hoped I would have more time. Finn studied his alpha carefully, choosing his next words with obvious caution. You could tell her the truth, before Callum finds a way to use it against you both. Kale was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains where Ashwood territory began. If I tell her, everything changes. She becomes a target the moment she understands what she is to me. Right now, she is simply an Omega who works in my kitchens. The moment she becomes my mate in truth, she becomes the single greatest weakness Crimson Moon has ever had. And if you keep hiding it, Finn said quietly, Callum will find her anyway, and she will have no idea what danger she is standing in. No idea how to protect herself, because you never gave her the truth. Chaol did not respond, but the muscle in his jaw ticked with barely restrained tension, and Finn knew he had struck a nerve his alpha could not easily dismiss. 2 days later, the Ashwood delegation departed. The border negotiations concluded with vague promises and thinly veiled tension that satisfied no one. Illyra breathed a sigh of relief the moment word spread that the visitors had crossed back beyond Crimson Moon borders, though the unsettled feeling in her chest refused to fully fade. She told herself it was over. Whatever strange danger had brushed against her life during that single terrifying meeting had passed, and she could return to her quiet, invisible existence within the kitchens. She was wrong. 3 nights after the delegation left, Illyra was walking back from the well near the edge of the inner wall, later than she should have been, a heavy bucket of water in each hand. The moon hung low and bright overhead, casting silver light across the training grounds, and the fortress around her had grown quiet with the late hour. She did not hear the figure approaching until it was almost too late. A hand closed around her arm from the shadows beside the wall, pulling her sharply off the path. Illyra gasped, water sloshing from the buckets as she stumbled, her heart lurching into her throat. She opened her mouth to scream, and a second hand covered it before any sound could escape. Quiet. A low voice hissed against her ear, unfamiliar and cold. We only need a moment. Panic surged through her, sharp and blinding. She twisted against the grip holding her, years of careful, quiet obedience giving way to raw instinct, but the stranger's hold was far stronger than her own. Through the terror clouding her mind, she registered the faint scent clinging to him, something foreign, something that did not belong within Crimson Moon walls. An Ashwood wolf. He had stayed behind. Just a message, the stranger continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell your alpha that Callum sends his regards, and that secrets kept for 7 years rarely stay buried forever. Before Illyra could process the words, a sharp howl split the night air from somewhere near the outer wall, followed almost immediately by shouting voices and the sound of running footsteps. The hand covering her mouth vanished as the stranger released her abruptly, melting back into the shadows and disappearing before she could even turn to see his face. Illyra sank to her knees on the cold ground, gasping for air, her whole body trembling violently. The buckets lay forgotten beside her, water soaking into the dirt. She barely registered the sound of more footsteps approaching, until a familiar voice, rough with barely controlled panic, called out her name. Chaol reached her within seconds, dropping to his knees in front of her, his hands hovering just above her shoulders, as though he was afraid to touch her, and afraid not to at the same time. Illyra, Illyra, look at me. Are you hurt? She could not answer right away, her breath still coming in ragged gasps, her mind still spinning with the stranger's whispered words. Chaol's hands finally settled gently against her arms, steadying her, his touch far gentler than she would have expected from a man capable of commanding an entire fortress with a single word. I am here, he said quietly, his voice low and urgent. You are safe. Tell me what happened. Slowly, haltingly, Illyra managed to recount what little she remembered, the hand pulling her from the path, the stranger's whispered message about secrets and 7 years. She watched Chaol's expression darken with each word, his jaw tightening, something fierce and protective burning behind his eyes. By the time she finished speaking, several warriors had gathered nearby, awaiting orders, but Chaol did not immediately address them. Instead, he remained kneeling in front of Illyra, his gaze searching her face as though committing every detail of her fear to memory, as though furious at himself for allowing it to happen at all. This is my fault, he said quietly, so quietly she almost missed it. Alpha, I do not understand, Illyra whispered. Why would Ashwood wolves come after me? I am nobody. Something shifted in Cale's expression at those words, a flash of pain so raw it startled her. He opened his mouth as though to respond, then closed it again, glancing briefly at the warriors waiting nearby before helping her carefully to her feet. "Come with me," he said finally. "It is time you learned the truth." Cale led her away from the gathered warriors, through quiet corridors lit only by scattered torchlight, until they reached a private study she had never seen before. The room was simple, compared to what she expected from an Alpha King, lined with shelves of old books and maps, a single fireplace crackling softly in the corner. He closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit, though he himself remained standing, pacing slowly near the window as though gathering courage for words that did not come easily to him. 7 years ago, he began, his voice low, you arrived at our gates half-starved, with no pack, no family, nothing but the clothes you wore. Do you remember that night? Elira nodded slowly, memories she had long tried to bury, rising to the surface. I remember very little. I was so exhausted I could barely stand. I was the one who found you, Cale said quietly. I was patrolling the border alone that night, something I rarely did, though I have never regretted the choice since. The moment I saw you, before you even spoke a single word, I felt something I had never felt before. A pull, a recognition, deep in my bones, the kind every wolf is taught about, but few ever truly experience. Elira's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories, whispered among the pack, about fated mates, about the rare and powerful bond that connected certain wolves across entire lifetimes. She had never once imagined such a story could belong to her. You are my fated mate, Cale continued, finally turning to face her directly, his dark eyes filled with something raw and unguarded for the first time since she had known him. I knew it the instant I found you, and I have known it every single day since. The words settled over Elira like a physical weight, impossible to fully absorb. 7 years, she whispered. You knew for 7 years, and you never once said anything. You never even looked at me. I could not, Cale said, his voice rough with something that sounded almost like pain. The moment I claim a mate publicly, she becomes the single greatest vulnerability I possess. Every enemy I have ever made, every rival pack that has ever wished to weaken Crimson Moon would immediately understand exactly how to hurt me most. I told myself that keeping you hidden, keeping you safe within the anonymity of the kitchens, was the only way to protect you. Elira stared at him, a storm of emotions rising within her chest, anger tangled tightly with disbelief, with confusion, with something warmer she was not yet ready to name. You let me believe for 7 years that I meant nothing to you, that I was simply another Omega you never noticed. I know. Cale crossed the room slowly, kneeling in front of her chair so that their eyes met directly. I know how much pain that silence must have caused you, and I am not asking you to forgive it easily. But every single day, I watched you from a distance. I memorized the sound of your laughter when you did not know I was near. I knew your favorite spot near the Eastern Garden, the one where you go when you need a moment of quiet. I have loved you in silence for 7 years, Elira, even when loving you meant staying away. Tears gathered in Elira's eyes, though she could not have said whether they came from anger, relief, or the overwhelming weight of everything she was finally learning. And now? Why tell me now, after everything? Cale's expression hardened slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on hers. Because Callum Ashwood recognized what you are to me the moment he saw you across the hall. He has known enough now to send his wolves after you directly, and I refuse to let you walk through the coming danger without understanding the truth of your own situation. You deserve to know exactly what you are protecting, and exactly what protects you. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft crackling of the fireplace. Elira studied his face carefully, searching for any trace of deception and finding none, only the same raw honesty that had unsettled and drawn her in equal measure since that first night in the hallway. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," Kale said, reaching out slowly to take her hand in his, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished. "I keep you close instead of distant. I protect you as I should have found the courage to do from the very beginning, and I hope, in time, that you might find it within yourself to accept a bond I should never have hidden from you in the first place." Illyra did not pull her hand away. The warmth of his touch spread slowly through her chest, chasing away some of the fear that had gripped her since the attack near the well, replacing it with something fragile and new, something she was not yet ready to name but could no longer deny. "I need time," she said honestly. 7 years of silence cannot simply disappear because of one conversation. "I understand," Kale said, and the sincerity in his voice told her he truly did. "Take whatever time you need. I am not asking you to love me tonight. I am only asking you to let me protect you, and to let me finally stop pretending you mean nothing to me." For the first time since the terrifying moment near the well, Illyra felt something steady beneath her fear, a quiet certainty that whatever storm was gathering around her, she would not have to face it entirely alone. Neither of them noticed the shadow that shifted briefly outside the study window before disappearing into the darkness of the fortress grounds. Nor could they have known that Callum Ashwood's network extended further within Crimson Moon walls than either of them yet realized. The following morning, Kale assigned 2 personal guards to remain near Illyra at all times, a decision that drew curious looks from the rest of the pack, though no one dared question their alpha directly. Word spread quickly regardless, whispered from kitchen to courtyard to training hall, until every wolf within Crimson Moon understood that the quiet Omega, who once moved through the fortress unnoticed, had somehow become someone worth protecting. Illyra found the sudden attention deeply uncomfortable. She had spent 7 years perfecting the art of invisibility, and the abrupt shift into visibility left her feeling exposed in ways she had never experienced before. Mira, at least, seemed thrilled by the development, peppering her with questions the moment they found a private moment together in the kitchen. "So, it is true," Mira said, eyes wide with excitement, despite Illyra's obvious exhaustion. "You are his fated mate. 7 years, and he finally told you." "It is complicated," Illyra said carefully, though a small, involuntary smile tugged at the corner of her mouth despite everything. "Complicated is one word for it," Mira said, laughing softly before her expression turned more serious. "Are you frightened?" "About Ashwood, I mean." Illyra's smile faded slightly. "Yes. Whoever grabbed me near the well knew exactly who I was to Kale, and if Callum Ashwood already suspects the truth, I do not think he intends to simply let it go." Mira reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever happens, you are not facing it alone anymore. You have Kale. You have his warriors. You have me." She smiled, though worry still lingered behind her eyes. 7 years of silence is finally broken. I do not think Callum Ashwood realizes exactly what kind of king he has awakened by trying to threaten you. Illyra wanted desperately to believe her friend's confidence, but as the days passed and the guards assigned to her never once left her side, she could not shake the growing sense that the danger surrounding her had only just begun, and that whatever Callum Ashwood was planning next would test not only her own courage, but the strength of a bond that had waited 7 long years to finally step into the light. 2 weeks passed with careful, guarded routine settling over the fortress. Illyra's guards, a steady pair named Owen and Silas, accompanied her everywhere, though they kept a respectful distance that allowed her to maintain some sense of normal life. Slowly, cautiously, she and Kale began building something neither of them had words for yet. Quiet conversations shared over evening meals. Walks along the eastern garden path she had once believed only she knew about. Moments of easy silence that felt far less awkward than either of them had expected. Illyra found herself watching for him now, the way she once trained herself never to do, a habit of 7 years unraveling faster than she could have predicted. She noticed the way his expression softened only around her, the way his shoulders relaxed slightly whenever she entered a room, small changes that told her the distant, Cold alpha the rest of the pack knew was only a fraction of who he truly was. "You are staring," Kale said one evening, a rare hint of amusement in his voice as they walked together near the garden, Owen and Silas trailing several respectful paces behind. "I am allowed to stare," Elira replied, feeling a warmth in her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the easy affection blooming quietly between them. "You spent 7 years staring at me without my knowledge. I believe I am simply catching up." Kale's low laugh, rare and genuine, sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. Fair enough. Their peace did not last. 3 nights later, a border patrol returned to the fortress in disarray, 2 warriors injured, reporting an ambush near the northern boundary that bore all the markings of Ashwood involvement, though no direct proof could be confirmed. Kale called an emergency council meeting that stretched long into the night, and Elira waited anxiously in her room, Owen and Silas standing guard just outside her door, until Finn finally arrived to deliver the news personally. "Ashwood scouts were seen retreating toward their border after the ambush," Finn explained grimly. "We believe Callum is testing our defenses, searching for weaknesses before making a larger move." "Does Kale believe this is connected to me?" Elira asked quietly. Finn hesitated before answering honestly. "He believes everything happening now is connected to you, in one way or another. Callum wants to draw Kale into a larger conflict, and the fastest way to do that is to threaten what Kale values most." The words settled heavily in Elira's chest. She had never imagined that her own existence could become the center of a conflict capable of shaking 2 entire packs, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on her long after Finn departed. The following days brought no further attacks, though the tension within Crimson Moon only continued to build. Extra warriors patrolled every border. Meetings stretched later into the night. Kale grew increasingly withdrawn during daylight hours, consumed by strategy and planning, though he never failed to seek Elira out each evening, as though her presence alone offered him a moment of peace amid the mounting pressure. It was during one such evening, as they sat together near the fireplace in his study, that Elira finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on her for days. "What does Callum actually want, beyond simply threatening you?" Kale's expression grew distant, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. Territory, mostly. Power. Ashwood Pack has always resented the boundaries drawn after the last great conflict between our packs, boundaries that favored Crimson Moon significantly. Callum has spent years searching for any advantage that might allow him to renegotiate those boundaries in his favor, by force if necessary. And I have become that advantage. "You have become a target," Kale corrected gently, reaching over to take her hand. "But you will never become his advantage. I will not allow it." Elira wanted to believe him completely, but the uncertainty gnawing at her chest refused to fully quiet, especially as she noticed something else troubling in the days that followed. Small, seemingly insignificant details that did not quite add up. A servant she did not recognize delivering supplies to the kitchen, a guard rotation schedule that changed without clear explanation, a feeling, persistent and unsettling, that she was being watched by someone other than her own assigned protectors. She mentioned it to Mira one afternoon while helping prepare the evening meal, keeping her voice low despite the empty kitchen around them. "You think someone inside Crimson Moon is working with Ashwood," Mira said slowly, her expression darkening with concern. "I do not know," Elira admitted. "It could be nothing. I could simply be imagining threats everywhere after everything that has happened. Or," Mira said carefully, "your instincts are telling you something worth paying attention to." Elira could not shake the unease Mira's words left behind, and that evening, she finally decided to share her concerns directly with Kale, finding him alone in his study, reviewing border reports by candlelight. "I think there may be someone within the fortress passing information to Ashwood," she said without preamble, watching his expression sharpen immediately with focused attention. "What have you noticed?" She explained everything carefully, the unfamiliar servant, the altered guard schedules, the persistent feeling of being watched by unfamiliar eyes. Cale listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each detail, until finally he rose from his desk and crossed to stand directly in front of her. "You should have told me the moment you noticed anything unusual," he said, though his tone carried concern rather than anger. "I did not want to seem foolish, chasing shadows that might not exist." "Alira," Cale said firmly, taking both her hands in his, "your instincts have already saved your life once. I will always listen when you tell me something feels wrong, no matter how small it might seem." He called Finn immediately, and the two men spent the rest of the evening discussing quiet, careful measures to identify any potential spy within the fortress without alerting whoever might be responsible. Alira remained close throughout the conversation, grateful, despite everything, that her voice was finally being heard rather than dismissed. It took 4 more days before their suspicions were confirmed. A kitchen worker named Dara, someone Alira had worked alongside for over a year without ever suspecting anything unusual, was discovered late one night near the outer wall, attempting to pass a folded parchment to a figure waiting in the shadows beyond the border. Warriors intercepted the exchange before any information could be delivered, capturing Dara and revealing, under careful questioning, that she had been feeding details about Alira's schedule and movements to Ashwood contacts for several weeks. "She was paid," Finn explained grimly to Cale and Alira the following morning, "and threatened. Her younger brother apparently lives near Ashwood territory, and Callum's people made it clear his safety depended on her cooperation." Alira felt a complicated mixture of anger and sympathy at the revelation, understanding all too well the desperation that came from having no power to protect the people one cared about. "What will happen to her?" "She will be dealt with according to pack law," Cale said, his tone leaving little room for argument, though something in his expression softened slightly at Alira's obvious distress. "But her brother will be found and protected as well. Callum's methods will not be rewarded within these walls." The discovery of the spy brought a temporary sense of relief, a feeling that at least one immediate threat had been neutralized, though Cale remained visibly unsettled in the days that followed, aware that Callum's reach had extended further within Crimson Moon than any of them had realized. "This will not be his last attempt," Cale said quietly one evening, as they stood together near the garden, the autumn air growing cooler around them. "Callum does not give up easily, and now that Dara has been discovered, he will simply search for another way in." Alira stepped closer, taking his hand without hesitation, a gesture that would have felt impossible only weeks earlier. "Then we face whatever comes next together. I am done being someone who simply waits in the shadows for danger to find her." Cale studied her carefully, something fierce and proud flickering behind his dark eyes. "You have grown remarkably brave in a very short time." "I had a good teacher," Alira said softly, a small smile finally breaking through the tension of recent weeks. 7 years of silence taught me how to survive quietly. Perhaps now it is time I learned how to survive loudly instead." Neither of them could have known, standing together in the quiet garden, that Callum Ashwood's true plan had barely begun, and that the coming weeks would test not only Alira's newfound courage, but the strength of the bond both of them were only just beginning to fully embrace. Autumn deepened across Crimson Moon territory, bringing colder nights and shorter days, though the fortress itself remained on constant alert. Dara's brother had been located and brought safely within pack borders, a small victory that eased some of the guilt Alira had carried since the discovery, though the larger threat from Ashwood territory remained unresolved, a shadow hanging over every quiet moment she and Cale managed to steal together. A month passed with unsettling quiet. No further spies were discovered, no border ambushes occurred. Cale grew cautiously hopeful that Callum might have decided against direct confrontation, though he never relaxed the extra security measures surrounding Alira, and something in his eyes told her he did not fully believe the danger had passed. He was right not to believe it. The trap, when it finally came, arrived disguised as an ordinary errand. Alira had been asked to deliver medicine to an elderly pack member living near the southern edge of the fortress grounds, a task she had performed countless times before without incident. Owen and Silas accompanied her as always, though the walk to the southern quarter took them along a quieter path lined with dense trees, less traveled than the main fortress roads. They were halfway along the path when Silas suddenly stopped walking, his head tilting slightly, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. "Something is wrong," he murmured, reaching for the blade at his hip. "I smell wolves that do not belong to Crimson Moon." Before Owen could respond, the forest around them erupted into chaos. Figures dropped from the trees and emerged from the underbrush, at least 6 warriors bearing the markings of Ashwood Pack, moving with coordinated precision that made it clear this attack had been carefully planned. Owen and Silas immediately positioned themselves protectively in front of Alira, but they were badly outnumbered, and within moments, the fight turned desperate. Alira stumbled backward as the clash of bodies and weapons filled the air around her, her heart hammering with terror as she watched her 2 guards fight valiantly against overwhelming odds. A hand suddenly closed around her wrist from behind, yanking her away from the chaos before she could even process what was happening. "Do not fight," a low voice warned near her ear. "It will only make this harder." She was dragged backward through the trees, while the sounds of battle continued behind her. Owen's furious shout cut short abruptly, in a way that made her stomach twist with dread. She fought against the grip holding her, twisting and pulling with every bit of strength she possessed, but her captor was far too strong, dragging her steadily toward the tree line where dark shapes waited in the shadows beyond. "Let me go!" she gasped, still struggling desperately. "Alpha Callum requested your presence," the wolf holding her said calmly, as though discussing something entirely ordinary. "He was very specific that you not be harmed, provided you cooperate." Panic clawed at Alira's chest as she was pulled beyond the fortress border, deeper into unfamiliar territory, the sounds of the fight behind her fading into an unsettling silence that told her Owen and Silas had either been defeated or were now too far away to help. She thought desperately of Cale, of the bond that connected them, wondering if he could somehow sense her fear across the growing distance between them. She was right to wonder. Miles away, within the walls of Crimson Moon, Cale suddenly froze in the middle of a council meeting, a sharp, visceral wave of dread crashing through him with such force that he nearly stumbled from his chair. Finn immediately noticed the change, rising from his own seat with obvious alarm. "Cale, what is it?" "Alira," Cale said, his voice barely above a whisper, his face draining of color. "Something has happened to Alira." Within minutes, warriors were dispatched to locate her, and it did not take long before Owen was found, badly injured, but alive, near the southern path, along with the scattered remains of a violent struggle. Silas, tragically, had not survived the ambush, and the discovery of his body sent a wave of fury through Cale, unlike anything Finn had witnessed from his alpha before. "They took her," Owen managed to say through gritted teeth as healers tended to his wounds. "Ashwood warriors. At least 6 of them." "I could not stop them. I am sorry, Alpha. You did everything you could," Cale said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the barely controlled rage simmering beneath his composed exterior. "Which direction did they take her?" "South, toward the border." Cale did not wait for further discussion. Within the hour, he had assembled his strongest warriors and set out toward Ashwood territory himself, ignoring Finn's cautious warnings about walking directly into what was almost certainly a carefully constructed trap. "I do not care if it is a trap," Cale said, his voice cold and hard as stone. "Callum has taken what belongs to me, and I will burn his entire fortress to the ground before I allow him to keep her." Meanwhile, deep within Ashwood territory, Alira was brought before Callum himself, in a large stone hall, lit by flickering torchlight, her wrists bound loosely enough to allow movement, but tight enough to prevent escape. Callum studied her with the same calculating gaze she remembered from their brief encounter weeks earlier, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "You are exactly as interesting as I hoped you would be," he said, circling her slowly. 7 years hidden away in a kitchen. Kale truly does have excellent instincts for secrecy. What do you want from me? Elira demanded, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear churning inside her. Leverage, Callum said simply. Kale will do anything to protect his fated mate, including surrendering territory he has spent years defending. You are simply the key that unlocks negotiations he would otherwise refuse to consider. He will not negotiate with someone who kidnaps innocent people, Elira said sharply. Callum's smile widened, unbothered by her defiance. We shall see. Alphas make all sorts of decisions when the person they love most hangs in the balance. He gestured to the wolves standing near the door. Make her comfortable, but ensure she does not leave this hall. I expect Kale will not keep us waiting long. As Elira was led toward a smaller adjoining room, her mind raced through every possible option, searching desperately for some path toward escape or rescue. She thought of Kale, of the fierce protectiveness she had seen in his eyes since the truth between them had finally come to light, and clung to the fragile hope that he would find a way to reach her before Callum's plans could fully unfold. She did not have to wait long to learn how right she was to hold on to that hope. Less than a day later, as dusk settled over Ashwood territory, a commotion erupted near the outer walls of Callum's fortress, shouts and the clash of weapons echoing through the stone corridors. Elira's heart leapt with desperate hope, even as fear tightened around her chest, understanding immediately what the chaos likely meant. Kale had come for her, exactly as she had known, deep down, that he would. The fighting outside grew louder, closer, until the door to the small room where Elira was being held burst open without warning. She braced herself instinctively, expecting an Ashwood guard come to move her deeper into the fortress, and instead found herself staring into familiar dark eyes, filled with a fierce, desperate relief that nearly buckled her knees. Kale. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, cutting the bindings from her wrists with a swift, practiced motion, before pulling her carefully into his arms, his whole body trembling slightly with the force of emotions he rarely allowed himself to show. I am here. I have you. How did you find me so quickly? She whispered against his chest, relief flooding through her so completely she nearly forgot the danger still surrounding them. I would have torn apart every fortress between here and the Northern Sea if that was what it took, Kale said fiercely, pulling back just enough to study her face, checking for any sign of injury with careful, urgent attention. Are you hurt? No. Frightened but not hurt. Relief flickered across his features before hardening back into fierce determination. We need to move. Callum's warriors are fighting my forces near the main gate, but this fortress is not safe for either of us. Stay close to me. He led her quickly through unfamiliar corridors, his warriors clearing a path ahead of them, though the sounds of battle remained close on every side. They were nearly to the outer courtyard when a figure stepped directly into their path, blocking the exit with calm, unhurried confidence. Callum stood before them, flanked by 2 of his strongest warriors, his expression carrying none of the panic Elira might have expected from a man whose careful plan was rapidly falling apart. Impressive, Callum said, studying Kale with something close to genuine respect. I did not expect you to move quite so quickly, or quite so recklessly. Step aside, Callum, Kale said, his voice dangerously low, positioning himself protectively between Elira and the Ashwood Alpha. This ends now, one way or another. It certainly will, Callum agreed, his gaze shifting briefly to Elira before returning to Kale. Though perhaps not in the way you are imagining. You see, I have learned something quite fascinating about fated bonds during my years of research. They are powerful, yes, but also remarkably fragile in certain specific circumstances. Kale's expression darkened further. What are you talking about? Callum smiled coldly. A bond that has never been fully sealed remains vulnerable. 7 years of denial, 7 years of distance, has left cracks in the connection between you that a sufficiently skilled practitioner could exploit. I have spent considerable resources acquiring exactly that kind of assistance. Before either Kale or Alira could fully process the threat, a figure emerged from the shadows behind Callum, an elderly woman wrapped in dark robes, her eyes carrying an unsettling silver glow that marked her as something far beyond an ordinary wolf. She raised both hands, murmuring words in an ancient language Alira did not recognize, and immediately a sharp, searing pain lanced through Alira's chest, so sudden and violent that she cried out and stumbled against Kale's side. "What is happening to her?" Kale demanded, fury and panic warring in his voice as he caught Alira before she could fall. "The bond is being severed," Callum said calmly, watching with clinical interest. "A painful process, I am told, but effective. Once complete, Alira will simply be an ordinary Omega again, no longer connected to you in any meaningful way. No longer a weakness you feel compelled to protect at the cost of your own territory." Alira gasped as another wave of searing pain crashed through her, her vision blurring at the edges, the world around her seeming to tilt dangerously. Through the haze of agony, she felt Kale's arms tighten around her, heard his voice calling her name with desperate intensity, though the sound seemed to come from somewhere increasingly distant. "Fight it," Kale urged fiercely, pressing his forehead against hers, his own eyes filled with something raw and unguarded. "Alira, please, fight it. Do not let them take this from us." Through the overwhelming pain, Alira focused on the sound of his voice, on the warmth of his hands still holding her steady, on the memory of every quiet moment they had shared since the truth between them had finally come to light. She thought of the walk through the garden, the low sound of his rare laughter, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes when he had burst through that door only moments earlier. She thought of choosing him, deliberately, completely, in a way she had never consciously done before. "I do not want it severed," she gasped out, gripping the front of his shirt with what little strength remained in her trembling hands. "I choose this bond. I choose you." Something shifted immediately in the air around them, a sharp, sudden reversal of the searing pain, as though her words themselves had reinforced whatever fragile connection the ancient woman's spell had been attempting to unravel. The elderly woman staggered backward with a startled gasp, clutching her chest as though the failed spell had struck her instead. "That should not be possible," she rasped, staring at Alira with something close to disbelief. "A bond cannot be reinforced through simple declaration, not against magic this old." "Perhaps," Kale said, his voice rough with emotion as he pulled Alira fully into his arms, feeling the pain gradually ease from her trembling body. "You underestimated exactly how strong a bond becomes once both people involved have chosen it freely, rather than one side hiding from it in silence." Callum's expression had shifted from calm confidence into something far more uncertain, watching the failed ritual with visible frustration. Before he could issue further orders, the sounds of battle from the courtyard beyond grew suddenly louder, and Finn's voice rang out clearly as he and a group of Crimson Moon warriors broke through the fortress defenses. "Kale, we have secured the eastern gate. It is time to leave." Kale did not hesitate. Scooping Alira carefully into his arms, still weak from the ordeal she had just survived, he turned toward Finn's voice, sparing Callum only a brief, final glance filled with unmistakable warning. "This is not finished between us," Kale said coldly. "But tonight, you have already lost." They retreated swiftly through the chaos, Kale's warriors covering their escape as they made their way beyond Ashwood territory and back toward the safety of Crimson Moon borders. By the time they crossed into familiar territory, dawn had begun to break across the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink that felt almost cruelly peaceful compared to the violence of the night before. Alira remained held securely in Kale's arms throughout the journey, her strength slowly returning as the last effects of the failed ritual faded from her body. When they finally reached the safety of the fortress walls, Kale carried her directly to his own chambers, refusing to release her even as healers arrived to check her condition. "She will recover fully," the healer assured him after a careful examination. "The bond itself appears completely intact, perhaps even strengthened, though she will need rest. Once the healer departed and they were finally alone, Kale sat beside her on the edge of the bed, taking her hand gently in his dark eyes filled with an emotion so raw and unguarded that Alira felt her own breath catch at the sight of it. "I have never been more afraid in my entire life," he admitted quietly, "than I was watching that woman try to tear you away from me." "I was afraid too," Alira admitted, squeezing his hand gently. "But I meant what I said. I choose this. I choose you, completely, without any doubt remaining." Kale leaned forward slowly, resting his forehead against hers, the same way he had during the desperate moments of the failed ritual. "Then let me finally give you what I should have offered from the very beginning. Let me claim you properly, before the entire pack, so that no one, not Callum, not any enemy who might come after him, will ever again mistake the strength of what exists between us." News of the rescue spread through Crimson Moon within hours, whispered from warrior to warrior, from kitchen worker to stable hand, until the entire fortress buzzed with a mixture of relief and fierce pride. The quiet Omega, who had once moved through the halls unnoticed, had survived capture by a rival Alpha and emerged with her bond to their king, not only intact, but visibly strengthened. By the time Alira had rested enough to leave Kale's chambers, she found herself the subject of curious, respectful glances everywhere she went, a stark contrast to the invisibility she had grown so accustomed to over the years. Mira found her within the hour, pulling her into a fierce hug the moment she saw her, tears gathering in her eyes. "I was so frightened when I heard what happened. Are you truly all right?" "I am," Alira said, and for the first time in weeks, she found she truly believed her own words. Frightened still, but all right. "And the bond?" Mira asked carefully. "I heard rumors that Ashwood tried something terrible." Alira nodded slowly, memories of the searing pain still fresh enough to make her shiver slightly. "They tried to sever it. It did not work." Mira's eyes widened with obvious relief and curiosity in equal measure. "How is that even possible? I have heard stories about bond-severing rituals. They are supposed to be nearly impossible to resist." "I chose him," Alira said simply. "Completely, without hesitation. I think that mattered more than anything else." Mira smiled warmly, squeezing her friend's hand. "It seems 7 years of silence finally gave way to something the whole pack can see clearly now." Over the following days, preparations began quietly for what Kale intended as a formal claiming ceremony, a public declaration before the entire pack that would leave no doubt about Alira's place at his side. Alira found herself nervous about the prospect, uncertain how the wider pack, many of whom had known her only as an unremarkable kitchen worker, would receive the news that their Alpha King had chosen her as his mate and future Luna. She voiced these concerns to Kale one evening as they walked together through the garden, the same path where their quiet friendship had first begun to bloom into something deeper. "You are worried the pack will not accept you," Kale said, understanding immediately without needing further explanation. "Some of them," Alira admitted. "I was an Omega with no family, no status, nothing to recommend me beyond simple hard work. Many will wonder why their Alpha chose someone like me." Kale stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression serious. "Let me tell you what I have witnessed over these past weeks. I watched you survive capture by a rival Alpha with more courage than warriors twice your size. I watched you resist a bond-severing ritual that would have broken far stronger wolves through sheer determination and choice. I watched you comfort your friend Dara's guilt with compassion rather than anger, even after her actions nearly cost you everything." He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "You are not simply worthy of standing beside me, Alira. You have proven yourself stronger than nearly anyone I have ever known." Warmth spread through her chest at his words, chasing away much of the lingering doubt that had settled there. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me for speaking the truth," Kale said softly, leaning down to press a gentle kiss against her forehead. "The pack will see exactly what I see." "Give them the chance." The night of the claiming ceremony arrived beneath a clear autumn sky, the courtyard transformed with warm lanterns and gathered flowers. Every member of Crimson Moon Pack assembled to witness the moment their Alpha King finally stepped forward with the mate he had protected in silence for 7 long years. Elira stood at the top of the stone steps beside Kale, dressed in deep crimson fabric that caught the lantern light beautifully, her heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and quiet joy. Kale addressed the gathered pack with a steadiness that belied the emotion Elira knew he carried beneath the surface. 7 years ago, I found a woman at our borders who would come to mean more to me than I ever believed possible. For 7 years, fear kept me silent, kept me distant, in the mistaken belief that protecting her meant hiding her from the world entirely. He turned to look directly at Elira, his dark eyes soft with open affection. I was wrong. True protection does not come from hiding what matters most. It comes from standing beside it, openly, fiercely, and without apology. He took Elira's hand, turning back to address the silent, attentive crowd. Tonight, I claim Elira not simply as my fated mate, but as the future Luna of Crimson Moon Pack. She has proven her strength, her courage, and her loyalty beyond any doubt, and I am honored beyond words that she has chosen to stand beside me, despite the years of silence I forced upon her. A moment of stillness followed his declaration, before the courtyard erupted into cheers, warm and enthusiastic, far exceeding anything Elira had dared to hope for. She caught sight of Mira near the front of the crowd, tears streaming freely down her face as she clapped and cheered, and further back, Owen, recovered from his injuries, offering a proud, respectful nod in her direction. Kale turned to her then, cupping her face gently in his hands once more, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that stole the breath from her lungs. 7 years I stayed away, he murmured, quiet enough that only she could hear. I intend to spend every remaining year making up for that silence. You already have, Elira whispered back, tears of her own gathering in her eyes. As he leaned down to seal their claiming with a gentle, tender kiss before the entire assembled pack, Elira felt the last remaining fragments of her old invisibility dissolve completely, replaced by something entirely new. She was no longer the quiet Omega who moved unnoticed through the shadows of the fortress. She was Luna of Crimson Moon, chosen openly, fiercely, and completely by the king, who had waited 7 long years to finally claim what his heart had recognized from the very first moment they met. The threat of Callum Ashwood had not vanished entirely, and both Kale and Elira understood that challenges would likely still lie ahead in the months to come. But standing together beneath the lantern light, surrounded by a pack that had embraced her without hesitation, Elira felt something she had not experienced in 7 long years of quiet survival. She felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that she truly belonged. In the weeks that followed, Elira settled gradually into her new role, learning the responsibilities of a Luna with the same quiet determination she had once brought to her work in the kitchens. She found, to her surprise, that many of the pack members who had once overlooked her now sought her guidance and company, drawn by the same quiet strength and compassion that had carried her through 7 years of invisibility and the terrifying weeks that followed its end. Kale remained fiercely protective, though he no longer hid his affection behind careful distance. Their bond, tested by fire and nearly torn apart by ancient magic, had emerged stronger than either of them could have imagined, a foundation solid enough to weather whatever challenges Callum Ashwood might still attempt in the future. On quiet evenings, when the responsibilities of the day finally settled and the fortress grew peaceful around them, Kale and Elira often returned to the garden path where their story had truly begun, walking together beneath the stars, no longer separated by 7 years of silence, but bound instead by a choice they had both made freely, completely, and without regret. The Alpha King, who had once never approached her, had finally learned that love, hidden away out of fear, protects nothing at all. Only love spoken aloud, defended openly, and chosen again and again through every trial that follows, can truly stand the test of time. And for Kael and Alira, standing together beneath the quiet stars of Crimson Moon territory, that lesson had finally, completely, and beautifully come true.